If you've been told your cholesterol is high, most people's mind go to the same place pretty quickly. Heart disease, blockages, something's wrong. And I get that because that's how this has been framed for a long time. Cholesterol or LDL, it goes up, we got to bring it down. But when I look at those labs, I don't really start there. I find myself backing up a step and asking, what is the body doing right now that would lead to that shift? Because these numbers, cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL, ApoB, they're not just sitting there, they're part of something that's moving. Energy. Your body is constantly moving energy. Fat gets stored, released, sent to the liver, repackaged, sent back out. That's happening all the time. And the way the body does that is by packaging that energy into particles. And that's what these labs are picking up. Triglycerides give you a sense of how much energy is being carried. LDL tells you how much cholesterol is inside those particles. And ApoB tells us more of a count, how many of these particles are actually there. So when those numbers go up, it's not just more cholesterol, it's more energy movement, more particles circulating. Now before this goes sideways, those particles do matter. Over time, higher levels are going to be associated with cardiovascular risk. So this isn't about ignoring cholesterol. It's more that the number is doing two things at once. It's telling you something about risk, and it's also telling you something about what the body is dealing with. And most of the time, we only focus on that first part. One of the patterns I see a lot, which is easy to miss, is what happens when the body is under ongoing stress. Not just a rough week, I mean when the body doesn't really settle back down. When your stress physiology is on, the body shifts more into mobilization mode. It starts pulling energy out of storage. Fat cells release fatty acids. They go to the liver, and the liver repackages it into particles and sends it back out into circulation. And if that's happening once in a while, it's no big deal. That's normal physiology. But if it's happening all the time, now you've got more particles moving around the bloodstream. ApoB starts to rise, LDL starts to rise. And it's not because of genetics, it's just because it's being told to mobilize energy so you can run from that tiger. So then you layer on some of the other things that tend to come about with stress. Sleep gets thrown off, blood sugar's less stable. The system doesn't really get a chance to recover. And over time, that can start to look like insulin resistance. And when that shows up, the liver tends to make even more of those particles. And what makes it worse, at the same time, the body might not clear as many of those particles as efficiently. So now you get it from both sides, right? More particles being produced and less particles being cleared. That is usually when those labs start to get flagged. This is also why I don't love looking at just LDL by itself, because you can have the same LDL number in different underlying physiology. So I tend to zoom out a bit. Look at things like ApoB, how many particles? Triglycerides and HDL, which shows your metabolic picture, and even their ratios, just to get a sense of that pattern. Lipoprotein a, which doesn't show up on a standard panel. Inflammation matters. None of those are perfect on their own, but together they tell more of a story. And that's how you evaluate true cardiovascular risk. Even something simple, if triglycerides are running higher, and HDL is lower, that usually points towards a body that's under more metabolic strain. But if triglycerides are lower, HDL is holding, that's generally a more stable picture. Not perfect, but helpful. So when someone sees that their cholesterol is elevated, the first step isn't panic, and it's not how do we get that number down as fast as possible. It needs to be why. What is the body responding to right now? Is the system undergoing ongoing stress? Is the blood sugar steady? Is sleep restorative? Is there inflammation? Because if those underlying signals are still there, you can bring that number down, but that underlying physiology hasn't really changed, which continues to contribute to that cardiovascular and metabolic risk. Now, there's absolutely a place for medication. Sometimes lowering LDL or ApoB directly is the right move. I just don't want that to be the end of the conversation, because sometimes the number is the issue, and sometimes the number is reflecting a body that's been under excess demand for too long. And when you start to change that, when the system settles, blood sugar stabilizes, sleep improves, you'll often see those numbers start to move too. But not because you forced them down, but because the body isn't being pushed in the direction of fight or flight anymore. The threat is gone. You no longer need to mobilize all that energy. So to me, the question shifts a little from how do I fix this number to what's underlying, what's driving this, and what happens if we change that. It's a longer conversation, Not as easy as popping a pill or an herb thinking you fixed the problem, but that's where I'd start.